It's time for the Phil Ferguson Show.
This is Phil Ferguson, and you are listening to The Phil Ferguson Show. I think we're on show 292. I think that's right. And a little later on in the Investing Skeptically segment, it's going to be about stock market volatility. That's come up to my attention more and more recently. Some of us have gotten spoiled by the market kind of going up most of the time, and when it goes down, not much for a few years. I mean, there's been some 15% market corrections over the last couple of years. But what is very interesting is while those 15% or even bigger drops kind of freak people out, they forget about them pretty quickly if the year ends up positive. Well, 2018 was a year that did not end up positive. So U.S. stocks, almost all the segments I look at are down. Some quite a bit more than others, but down. Most international funds are down. A lot of bond funds were down. The very short-term bond funds did make a little bit of money, and some corporate bond funds made money, but a lot of things were down. It's very hard to make a lot of money if you look at the beginning and compare it to the end of 2018. And this can happen in investing. Keep in mind that in 2017, the stock market went up, I think, measured by the S&P 500, about 22%. So even over the 2-year time period, you're still doing really well. And the 10-year average is well over 10% now. The 15-year average is under 10%. So, nothing going crazy. And again, I'll have that in the upcoming Investing Skeptically segment. Stocks are for the long run. The cushion is for the short run. And that's how kind of all this stuff works. Other thing in the news, and one of the motivators for the upcoming Investing Skeptically segment is unfortunately John C. Bogle, the founder of Vanguard Mutual Fund Company, has passed away recently. I think he was something like 89 years of age. I don't know if I have that right, but he was quite a few years up there and still active. And even a few weeks ago, we talked about a recent article that he wrote with concerns about consolidation in mutual fund companies and their potential ownership problems of individually traded companies and individual stocks. So we've got all that coming up. And of course, after that, we have an interview. We have an interview with someone that left religion and had a really rough childhood, had not necessarily the best parents and best family members. And we're going to talk about some childhood abuse and maybe even some adult abuse in that segment. So if that's something that really bothers you, just, maybe you skip that part. I don't know. Just be warned. So we've got a lot going on. The other thing is the Patreon. Yeah, if you contribute, you're a patron, but the site is Patreon. If you like the show, I can't speak English today. If you like the show, you can go to Patreon/Phil, Phil, real simple. I was surprised I could get a link that short, patreon.com/Phil. You can go there and contribute to support the show. Of course, as a reminder, you're supporting the show. You're not becoming a client, and a client relationship is not established if you contribute money over there. Right now, we're doing kind of a fundraiser, a matching kind of thing. And I talked about this last week. One of the listeners is helping out. So whatever is contributed via Patreon in January, February, and March, the listener will match or double it up to $5,000. So if you guys contribute $2,500, he'll double it up to $5,000 out of his own pocket. So if you donate $2,500, he'll match $2,500. And I'm going to double all of that up to $5,000 out of my pocket. So if you guys contribute $2,500, one listener will double that to $2,500, and then I'll double it again with $5,000. So we can raise $10,000 or more if you guys get really crazy. At the rate we're going, I think we're going to come up a little short, but that's okay. We'll contribute what we can. Again, patreon.com/Phil. If you have people that you'd like me to interview, whether they're in the secular/free thought atheist movement, or if there's someone who's an expert in economics or finance, I'd be happy to have them on the show. It's much more helpful to me if you have some way to contact them directly. It's nice when people would throw out big famous names of people, but big famous name people are hard to reach. So if you have contacts, that'd be great. If you have questions or topics that you'd like me to cover in the Investing Skeptically segment, I would love to hear that. And of course, assuming I can get on a plane in about a week, maybe only a few days, depending on when you listen to this, I'm going to Austin, Texas. Again, assuming TSA can get me through. I did recently apply for a pre-check number. I haven't gotten that number yet. Again, my fingers are crossed that hopefully I can go in the pre-check line, and that saves me a lot of hassle at the airport. I will be going there Thursday, January 31st of 2019. I'll be on a couple of different shows down there, I think. I've got to double check that. And then, of course, on February 3rd, which I only recently found out is some football game, is going to be that day. So we'll see how many people show up at the show. But I will be on Atheist Experience TV show on February 3rd, and we'll be talking to whoever calls in, I guess, but mostly believers, mostly people that are probably Christian. And I'm not 100% sure who I will be with, but last I heard it was going to be my good friend Tracy Harris. So looking forward to that. If you're in the Austin area and want to meet, send me a message, and maybe somewhere along the line we can get together and have a dinner at some place that's nice, but not too expensive. We don't want to get carried away. Maybe some nice Texas barbecue. I do like barbecue. So anyway, that's enough of that. We'll take a quick interlude here, and we'll get into the Investing Skeptically. And after that, we'll have our interview for the day. Today's Investing Skeptically topic is about stock market risk or volatility. Sometimes the markets behave and are pretty smooth and calm, and sometimes they jump around day to day, up several percentage points, down several percentage points, and this can cause grave concern to a lot of investors. And one of the things, of course, I tell people on a regular basis, ignore that shit. It's a question that I get from time to time. People ask, what am I going to do to protect them from market drops? Nothing. I am not. I am a firm believer in buy and hold. Now, we do make some adjustments from time to time, but for the most part, we just want to buy things and hold things. If you're close to retirement, 10, 12, 14 years from retirement, you want to start thinking about building the cushion, which we're going to talk about in a future episode. We've talked about it in the past, but today is specifically about the stock market, more specifically the U.S. stock market, and the volatility that has. And I am looking, I'm getting some of this data from the book Common Sense on Mutual Funds. It is now fourth in my list of 4 books that you should read. It's not necessary that you read this to understand a lot of my philosophy and investment styles, but you will understand a whole lot better if you have this book. And of course, this book is written by John C. Bogle, the founder of Vanguard, who has recently passed away, unfortunately. And this is my investing Bible. It is not the easiest book to read. I mean, it's actually well written, but it's got a lot of data, a lot of tables, a lot of charts, a lot of graphs, a lot of complex topics. And so that's why it's the fourth in my book, because if you don't know anything about investing and someone hands you this book, you're going to drown in it. It's too much. You need to have some foundation to understand a lot of what's going on in here. And this is the one book that I do recommend that you get in physical form. I don't think there's a paperback, so hardback. You can also get it in Kindle and audiobook, but graphs and charts don't convey in an audiobook at all. And even in Kindle, sometimes they're on the wrong page or they just don't look right. And it just didn't do it for me. So I recommend the physical medium version of this hardback cover and treat it like a textbook. Don't expect to sit down and read this like Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter or some other book that you're just going to whip through in a couple days. It's very intensive. So treat it that way. But today I'm looking at the 10th anniversary edition, which was, I think, 2010. So it's almost 10 years old, 9 years old. And it did cover the 2008 big market crash, so that data is in here. But some of these ideas go back a very, very long time. Matter of fact, today I'm going to be looking at data from 1802 to 2008, inclusive of 2008. And so we get a pretty good picture. And the nice thing is that this book is the 10th anniversary redo, and I'm assuming at some point they'll do another update. I hope so, to include more data. Obviously, John Bogle can't add more content or comments, but anyway, so wonderful book. And the first version, the 20-year-old one now, has all that data is still in here, and they just added new data to it. So I am looking in a chapter called On Long-Term Investing, and the specific subsection here, what is this called? We're looking at page 15 forward. It's called Stock Market Risk. And like I said, the data I'm going to look at is from 1802 to 2008. And the thing that I want to point out, a lot of people get very concerned about the stock market and what it might lose or gain in 1 year. And you can have very, very big swings. You can make 50% in a year, and you can lose 30, 40, maybe even 50% in a year. So one of the things I tell people on a regular basis is you don't try the stock market. You either do it or you don't do it. It's not something you try, because there's so many stories of people who've heard their friends making money year after year after year, and then they say, okay, I'm going to try the stock market, and they lose 25%, and then they take their money out, and then the market goes back up again. Don't be that person. You can't do that. I mean, if you have not convinced yourself that the market is a good thing in the long run, and or you can't just live with the day-to-day volatility because you can't force yourself to ignore what happens day-to-day, maybe you shouldn't invest in stocks, but then you're stuck with bonds and you're going to make like 3-4%. Not a whole lot, but it's better than freaking yourself out. I don't know. Maybe you just need to learn more. Maybe you need to read the books I suggest. And in this section of the book, he's talking about volatility, risk. Risk is measured mathematically by a volatility formula. So if the stock market went up 10% every year, every single time, every year, the volatility and therefore the risk would be close to zero. But it doesn't. Now we have, like last year, it was up most of the year. And then at the end of 2018, the market went down considerably, ending up in a net result of a small loss, 5-6% for calendar year 2018. But the previous year was 22%. And I think that before that was 14 and then 2. We've had 8 or 9 years where the market went up. And you can have big years like 2008 where it went down 37%. The next topic that's really nice to know, to understand what I'm going to get into more detail here, is standard deviation. Standard deviation explains the arrangement of the data around a midpoint. So like IQ, I'm not saying that the IQ test is good or bad, but just you're familiar with it. Normally IQ is 100. Most people are pretty close to 100 on an IQ test. And the standard deviation, I think, if I recall this correctly, is 15 points. So from 85 to 115 includes one standard deviation of the population, or about 2/3. I think the number is 66.6%. If you got 2 standard deviations, I think, and this is off the top of my head, you include about 95% of the population. So if you go from 70 to 130, 95% of the population is in there, with more plus or minus 15 and even higher peaks. So kind of what you consider a classic bell curve. If you look at annual stock market returns year after year after year, and you put them all on a big graph like that, you get something pretty close to a bell curve. Not always, but you can have, most years are around the middle. Some are smaller than average, some are bigger than average. Some are way smaller, huge negatives, and some are way bigger, huge positives. So you can create a calculation. You can use the standard deviation formula to kind of figure out what standard deviation for the stock market is. And this is not just the S&P 500. This is using the best data that's available. And when I say available, it's not available to you, and it's not available to me. You have to pay for it because people have done a lot of time and effort to get this data. And John Bogle, for creating his book, got this data. So he summarizes it nicely for us, which is very nice. If you look at the possibilities of 1 year, so you just pick any random year, the standard deviation, or one standard deviation, floats around between minus 12% to positive 25%. And just keep in mind, this is real returns. So another word for us to learn. Real returns are your actual returns minus inflation. So this is all inflation adjusted. The long-term expected return in any one given year is 6.5%, with inflation around 3.25, something like that. You end up with 9.5, close to 10%, which is what we talk about. Depending on the date range, you can look at it as being 10.5 or 11. If you look at Wikipedia, S&P 500, I think the most updated version there is either 10.3 or 10.5% per year. Actual return, not adjusted down for inflation. But in this book, in this chapter at least, John Bogle reduced everything by inflation. So you have the real returns after inflation. So in any given random year, you can have these incredibly extreme swings. But it's likely within one standard deviation, 2/3 of the time, that your return for one calendar year is going to be no greater than 25 and no worse than minus 12. Again, that's 2/3 of the time. So 1/3 of the time, it's going to be higher than that or lower than that, about 16% equally each. So in any one given random year, give or take, there's a 16% chance that you'll lose 12% or more. So see how this works? And that's the volatility that scares the shit out of people. And that's why you can't try the market in 1 year. The market is reasonable and rational until it's not. And sometimes it has big wild swings, and it can run up in a panic of ecstasy, and it can run down in a panic of fear when things happen. There are ways to mitigate that. And we talked about a few episodes ago. If you're a brand new investor, you are benefiting from a huge drop because you get to put more money in the following years at lower costs. So that's one way to avoid it. Another way to mitigate the volatility of the stock market is to have a big cushion. And in retirement, you want to have some of your money in the cushion, making 2, 3, 4%. As interest rates rise, that gets a little bit better. And the other way is time. And so today is going to focus on time. If you invest for 5 years, the standard deviation falls from 18.3 to 7.4. So if you invest in the stock market for 5 years, the volatility, as measured by the standard deviation, falls by more than half. It goes from 18.3% to 7.4. So the average expected return in 5 years is 6.8% real. So after you take out inflation, account for inflation, and the upper bounds of this one standard deviation is 14.2 and 0.6 negative, minus 0.6. So 2/3 of the time, your return over that 5-year period will be between 14.2 and slightly negative per year over a 5-year period. So you can see that the odds of now losing money get very small because less than one standard deviation, almost all of that is positive. So again, you have about a 15 or 16 and 2/3% chance of losing money in a 5-year investment. It gets where the risk becomes smaller and smaller. When we go to 10 years, you have, from this point on, the expected return averages out to about 6.9, and going forward about 6.9 or 7%. Again, if you add inflation, that's how you get to the 10% plus. At 10 years, the standard deviation falls to 4.6%, or I guess 4.6. That is the range from the likely highest per year to likely lowest per year, and those numbers are 11.5 and 2.3. So if you take the 6.9 and you add 4.6 to it, you get 11.5. So when you invest for 10 years, you have one standard deviation. So 2/3 of the time, you should expect to make between 11.5 and 2.3. And we keep doing this until we get to, I'm going to go out to 25 years because that's a pretty reasonable time frame for almost everybody who's listening, unless you know something about your health that I don't know, and I'm terribly sorry to hear if that's the case. But most people, even when you retire, you hope to live 15, 20, 30 years. So this 25-year thing is still a reasonable thing to look at. And a lot of people do expect to leave some part or all of their money to their children or to a charity of some kind. So this gets important. So again, the expected return, real return after inflation is taken away is 6.9%. But now the standard deviation is all the way down to 1.4. So 2/3 of the time, your return is going to be between 8.3 and 5.5. Again, add in 3% to inflation if you wish, but you're doing pretty well. And it also means that if that's one standard deviation, that 2 or 3 standard deviations in this case, you're still positive. So it's almost a given when you get past, I think, about 15 years that you're not going to lose money. In reality, there's only one 10-year time period in the last 100 years that the market was down over 10 years when you include dividends and do not adjust for inflation. So it's rare to lose money in the stock market when you invest for the long run. And the longer the run, 10 years is really unlikely. 15 years hasn't really happened. And 25 years, you have a pretty good return. And so I wish I could, in a podcast, I can't show you this graph, but the top of these bars and the bottom of the bars get closer and closer together. So stock market returns in the long run become more predictable than they are in the short run. So when people ask me about what's happening now, why did the market go up or why did the market go down, often you don't know. And one of the best things I can provide people as an advisor is to keep the emotion out of it. We have a plan, we have a system, and there's reasons for that system. Now, it may work out to be wrong, but there are certain ways that I do things, and I stick to it, and I do it to the same thing with my accounts as I do with my clients' accounts. And because your money's not quite as important to me as it is to you, at least it should be more important to you than it is to me, I can kind of step outside of the emotional experience that you're having and just say, this is what we do. And we buy, we hold, we invest, because in the long run, the stock market is very predictable that you're going to make about 6.9% plus inflation. You actually get something close to 10% per year in the long run. So that's how you do the stock market. And this is one of the things that you cannot do or predict with individual stocks. You can't do it with managed mutual funds, which I'm going to dig into this book and do one on winning mutual funds in a coming few weeks. Of course, if you have other topics you want me to do, let me know. But that's going to be the wrap up on stock market volatility, U.S. stock market volatility, and how you can make it virtually go away. And one of those ways is time. So you invest for the long run. You always invest. You keep investing. And even if you're hitting retirement, you probably want a good chunk, maybe even the bulk of your money in the stock market, depending on, of course, your personal situation.
You're listening to The Phil Ferguson Show.
My name is Annie Druyan, and I'm founder of Cosmos Studios and an honored to have been the longtime collaborator of Carl Sagan. And I'd like to say that I think it's just the opposite of what you're saying from my perspective, humbly. One is that I think that science tolerates the unknown in a way that religion doesn't. My argument is not with people who search for God. My argument is with people who feel that our understanding of God is completed. And those are the people who make so much of our existence on this planet such a hell, because they really think that they have the right to kill other people, to hurt them, because of what they understand God's will to be. That's a very destructive thing. So science is, the whole methodology of science is saying that we are not permitted these absolute truths that religion pretends to have, that we do not know the answer to these questions. And not only that, but the little that we think we do know, if you can prove us wrong, we'll give you our highest reward. And that's part of the methodology. That's part of the whole functioning of the system itself. So yes, in answer to what Joan was saying earlier, Scientists do terrible things. Scientists have biases. Religious people do terrible things, and they have biases. But absolutely intrinsic to the whole the methodology of science, is that error-correcting mechanism, which says we must never lose sight of that. That's not in religion. That's not present at all. Talk about humble. It's the fact that we do science and that we can bring ourselves to see that little tiny earth in Carolyn's presentation. That is humility. What science has done for us spiritually is that it has been the only thing that I know of that has compelled us to wean ourselves of our infantile need for centrality. And that was present, that is very much the essence of so many religious formulations of where we come from, why we came to be. It's the sign of mental health, that we can bear to think that this planet was perfectly fine for 4.5 billion years without us. That cosmic evolution goes on for 13.5 billion years before we even get here. How long have we been in science? How long have we systematically been looking at nature? Not even 400 years. And yet science gets us out to Enceladus. It takes us out of the solar system. It enables us to wean ourselves of that spiritual narcissism which compelled us to be at the center of everything. So when it comes to humility, when it comes to a tolerance for ambiguity and for the unknown, I think science worships the unknown. I think scientists are most comfortable in that place of not knowing. And that's where they live. And that's the great strength of science. So I would respectfully disagree.
The Phil Ferguson Show is for educational purposes only. Nothing said on the show should be interpreted as personalized investment advice. Your investment should be based on your situation, and you should consult with your financial advisor before taking any action. The show may contain ads. These ads are placed into the show by the hosting company after I finish recording and editing. I have little control over the content of the ads, and you should not assume that I support their products or claims. If you choose to support the show via the new Patreon page, that support does not create an advisor-client relationship. All right, everybody, welcome back. Of course, you are listening to The Phil Ferguson Show, and I am the aforementioned Phil Ferguson, and I have a special guest on here in just a second, but I did want to give, I guess, a little bit of warning. We may be talking about topics that are sensitive. I guess we will be talking about topics that are sensitive that may bother you. So if you are triggered by discussions of childhood abuse, religious indoctrination, or things in that nature, it might not be the show for you, but you've been warned. So we're going to do that. Coming on, I have Michele Roberts, and she's going to talk to us about her story. Michele, are you there?
Oh, I'm good, thank you.
Excellent, excellent. I am delighted that you've taken the time to join us. And I know we were talking a little bit about in pre-show, one of your goals is to let people know that they're not alone and they can talk about these. Can you walk me through the psychology of that?
Yeah. One of the things that I've come across in coming out with my story, not just the religious component of it, but also the abuse component, is that many people will have a habit of victim blaming. And there is this stigma that we have that, and my voice kind of quavers a little even if I talk about it because I still get anxious, over it, but that they don't like you to talk about it. It makes them uncomfortable. It makes people, they turn around, they don't want to blame the institutions that caused it. They don't want to blame the overall culture.
Sure.
Let's say that. So they'll turn and they'll say, well, you're bad for saying it. You should forgive, the people that did this. You should forget about it. And my whole thing is to say, no, this is your experience. This happened to you. You were affected by it, and you have every right to come out and talk about it. you have every right to say how it affected you. And that goes for, the religious component, that goes for the abuse component, that goes for the victim blaming component, just all of it.
Excellent. Well, thank you for explaining that to us. And of course, if at any point we need to take a pause, we can do that. If you don't want to answer or continue down a topic that we're discussing about, we have that option. It's just me and you talking on the phone. It's no big deal. Other than we're helping people out.
Right.
So why don't you let's go back in the way back machine when you were a little girl, and tell us what was going on and how things started to go wrong.
Okay. Well, first of all, the main thing in my life when I was growing up is family. That's the main thing everybody has. That's your world. And my family and my world was pretty much torn apart from the start. I grew up with my parents constantly fighting. They would literally drag us into the fights. My mother would. She would line us up, ask us who the better parent was if we gave the wrong answer, and I will tell you there was no right answer to that because you were afraid to say, I love my mother more because your dad would get mad at you. You were afraid to say, I love my father more because the mother would get mad at you. And you could not, and I learned this from experience, say, I love both parents equally because my mother actually attacked me for that because my mother is, as I learned later, a narcissist who used religion as her, how do I put it? Her main thing was, Jesus loves me and God loves me and God is going to give me this and God loves you and if you are just good, God will give you all this. And for me, it all just it didn't make sense, but I had to try to make sense of it in my mind. So I would say, okay, I'll pray to God, I'll talk to God, and I will say, if God loves me, if I'm good enough, all this stuff will get better. And nothing, of course, got better because, as an atheist now, I know there was no God that I was talking to, but in my mind, I was like, okay, why is he not helping? And things had actually gotten worse. My mother got it in her mind, and here's the trigger warning here, to decide to make me accuse my dad of molestation. Oh. And my dad didn't do anything to me. My dad had never done anything to me. But my mother was adamant to make me say that he was. And she lined us up and at this time, and she was asking each of us, did your father do anything to you? And I tried to say no several times. I kept saying no, and she kept asking me, are you sure? Are you sure? Are you sure? And she tripped me up, and I remember at that point dissociating because this was the beginning of the PTSD from all this, that I just I couldn't handle it. So she tripped me up, and I finally said okay. And so during all this time, though, I'm trying in my mind to think, why would God allow this to happen? Why is this happening? And it came to this point for me to where I thought, okay, maybe I went back and forth between, is God testing me, or does God really hate me? And when you're a child, and you don't question the authority figures, you don't question the idea of a God because everybody puts it as this resolute thing. It's definitely there, this absolute thing. And you say, okay, it's me, it must be me, or he must have some plan for me. And in reality, I was at the mercy of a psychotic woman, and my father, who was an enabler to her and would not do anything himself. So during this time as a child, I was scared to death. I didn't know what to do. My family turned on me. My brothers, children will not go after the authority figure. They would not face my mom and say, yeah, she did this. They turned on me and said, this is your fault. My dad turned on me. My grandmother turned on me. So it was a point in my life where I was mobbed by my entire family. And I didn't know what to do. All I could do was she'd feed me these lines of things that he'd done that he never did. And I would just nod my head and say, okay, but really, in reality, I was off somewhere else in my mind. I was floating above somewhere else. So fast forward, though, to a little bit later, everybody stops talking about it just all of a sudden, and I'm afraid to ever bring it up again. A few years later, I really am molested by an uncle, and in my mind, because of all this, I believe that God is punishing me. I actually believed that I had done something wrong, or I had been something wrong, and that while my mom is talking about how blessed she is and how much she has, or how God is going to give her this or God is going to give her that, I'm over here having things taken from me, systematically. My self-esteem, my sense of self, and because there is this idea that God is this all-knowing, all-good, all-just being, I just feel, oh my God, it's me. Something's wrong with me. So yeah, my childhood was steeped in this idea of something absolute should be doing something, but they're not, and because of that, it must be my fault.
I understand, and I tell you, you just about broke my heart when you started with your parents would argue and bring the kids into it. Just that far, I'm distraught, because as a parent, I could never even fathom doing that, and then it got worse. So just take a moment to breathe. You've shared a lot of content with us, and let us absorb it. And of course, I am terribly sorry that you've gone through this, and I appreciate that you're willing to talk about this, because I think it's important, as we discussed before the show, that if anyone else is dealing with this, that they know it's not them, they're not doing something wrong, and if it's revolving around religion, God is not punishing them. There isn't one. So kind of with all of that, where do we go next?
So I didn't begin to start questioning religion in full until I got into college. And now college is something that I had to fight my way into because my mom never wanted me to go.
Okay.
She never finished high school herself, and she wanted me to do the same. She had pulled me out of high school when I was younger, and I had to go back later and get my GED. And I actually just got my master's degree, so I'm
Congratulations.
I'm very proud of myself for getting that far, because this is something I've always wanted. And it brings up another point, if I can say for a second, that when I was a kid, my mom would tell me, and this is all part of the whole trauma bonding that you go through with your parents, that she would say, oh, when your grandmother died, I had this dream that she told me Michelle's going to do well, Michelle's going to do great. And it really brings up, and this is something that has hit me, my whole life, is this self-fulfilling prophecy that I told myself, like, throughout my life. I said, okay, maybe God wants me to do better, even though, I'm going through all this. But the truth is, I did all this myself. I wanted it, and so I made that happen. But anyway, in college, I started to learn about the history of not just religion itself, but its role in, the making of America and everything.
Sure.
And, the way that they treated Native Americans, the way that they treated slaves, and how religion was used to basically, eradicate people. It was used as a way to push someone's will onto them, no different than the way my mom used to push her will on me. And I learned about different Western religions and how they were so similar. And I'm sitting in the class and I'm thinking, these really just reflect the people. And it's something that you don't really think about, because with religion and with, ideas of gods and everything, you think, well, these things are just all powerful and they're just there. But when you stop to look at it, you say, no, I mean, these things, everything that they have, all the things that come from the God, all the rules and everything, they reflect the society that they're in, And I finally got to the point where I totally questioned it when it came to the way that religious people, that Christians treat gay people. And I got into an argument with someone online, and they mentioned, well, God wants gays dead. And I'm like, what? No. And they put the quote from the Bible, and I had actually, strangely enough, up to that point, had never seen that quote, that they should be stoned.
Right.
And I was like, oh my God, it's actually in the Bible. And I'm like, how can a God be good, and want this? And that's when it started. That's when I started to have my awakening, basically. And I was afraid to call myself an atheist at first. I was just questioning. I was just an agnostic. And I went through all these things, these whole changes. I remember the whole stages of grief, shall we say, or the stages of acceptance that I went through. And it took me a year, basically, till I could finally say I was an atheist. And I remember the exact moment I was, cleaning out my closet, a funny thing to be doing at the moment.
Yeah.
And, and I remember just standing there staring at a shirt and asking myself, why do I still want to believe in this? Because I had been asking, I've been saying, God, please give me a sign you exist. Please give me a sign you exist. And nothing ever came. And I asked myself, why do I want to believe in this so much when everything to the contrary is true, is shows itself to me? And I said, and the reason I realized was because I'm afraid, because I've always been told that if I don't believe that I'm bad or that I'm going to go to hell. And I just stopped and I said to myself, that's not a good enough reason. And that's when I first called myself an atheist.
And how long ago was that? Not too long ago?
Oh, this was back in, this was about 10 years ago. This was in roughly 2010. Okay. 2011. So yeah, because I was still in college, and I was still in the middle of it, basically.
Sure. And now you have a master's.
Yes, now I have my master's degree. I had to take a couple of years in between to work before I went for that. But
yeah, life can be like that. How are relations with your family now? Do you talk? What's going on there?
In 2016, I officially went no contact with my mother. I came out publicly on Facebook about the abuse. I did suffer some blowback from both my brothers came in, and anyone will tell you if you have a narcissist, and that's what my mother is, she will have, what we call flying monkeys, the people who will do her quote unquote bidding, the ones who, she'll send after you. And both my brothers basically swooped in, one brother telling me I was lying and I was crazy, and the other one who actually said, you're too smart for your own good. And they both had different experiences with my mom, both had different feelings about my mom, and yet they both were doing this. So I cut off my relationship with everyone who's been toxic, actually. I cut her out, and I have not regretted it. I missed the relationship I wish I could have had with her, because so many people come on and say, I love my mom so much, and I've got this great mom, and I think, yeah, I wish I had that. But, there's nothing I can do about it. I had to basically be my own mom, or to seek out other mother figures who were more healthy, for me. I still talk to other family members. My sister, she also had been abused really badly as a child and also has PTSD, and I still talk to her. But yeah, the whole thing with, I think, becoming an atheist is where I really started to stand up for myself.
How so?
It was me standing up to an authority figure and asserting my truth. And I know they say my truth, as if it's like that, but asserting honesty, and being intellectually honest with myself, and not being afraid to tell everyone, because there is this fear out there now that if you say you're an atheist, you're going to piss people off, that people are going to get offended, that they're going to worry because your existence in a way devalues their belief. And I think that's the reason they hate atheists as much as they do, or they're scared of them as they are, because we exist. Our existence means that their God might not exist.
Yeah, for some people that's absolutely true.
Yeah. So So that is the first thing I have been vocal about, saying, yes, I'm an atheist. No, I don't believe in any gods. And that started me on, it kind of solidified my strength in a way. Because it was a major thing as well, because you're questioning what everyone thinks to be the very power behind the universe, and you're saying it's not there. Everything that happened to me, everything that has happened since then has been, it's like you take away the blinders and you see the situation for what it really was. And I was able to look at my situation, and I was able to look at both the good and the bad. The fact that I thought, oh, maybe I was meant for something more, and to say, no, you got something more because you wanted something more, and because you didn't want to be isolated in that place that she was trying to isolate you in. So yeah, it led me down this path where I stopped following everybody and started leading myself.
Great. Well,
you don't, huh?
What do you do for the future? What's next in your life?
I mean, one of the major things that I've been able to do is to get out of abusive relationships in general.
Okay.
To be able to, I mean, growing up, my mom always basically would say, you can't take care of yourself. You need someone else to do it. I've been able to take care of myself. Greater goals I have are to be an advocate for others who've been abused by parents, especially narcissistic abuse or psychological abuse, because that is something that is so rarely talked about. We talk about sexual abuse and we talk about physical abuse, but we do not talk about what they call the murder of the soul, the psychological abuse, the gaslighting, the eradication of people's self-esteem from parents. We don't talk about those things, and that is something that in the future, or even now, that I'm trying to advocate for people who go through that. And religion is a big way that people do this anymore. People who grow up in very stifling religious families, they're told that, God will punish them because God wants them to be this way or God wants them to be that way. And a lot of the time it is the will of the parent being pushed on the child, using a fabrication, of God as an how do I put it, a way to
Sure.
tell them that something bigger than themselves, a bigger authority figure, bigger than your parents, because you can go against your parents, but oh no, you can't go against a God.
Yeah, and it's a canned system for perpetrating abuse and mind control, and I think it facilitates that situation, and it's awful to hear, and I'm so sorry that you had to endure that, but I'm delighted that things are going better, and you've gotten this education, and you've made these things happen for yourself, and that is a wonderful story of success, and a way to show people that it does get better, and you can make things happen.
Yes, and I would say that one of the best things is to seek out answers from other people who've been through the same thing. That's probably that and being strong in yourself, knowing that you have you. It can be difficult sometimes and feel difficult, especially if you still have contact with these people. But in the end, you have yourself and you have others who will validate you.
I think that's a wonderful message. Is there anything else that we want to cover before we wrap up?
No, I think that's basically everything, and I'm very glad that I got to do this.
Well, I am honored that you have spent so much time telling us your story, and hopefully this helps some other people. And Michele, I thank you so much for being on the show.
You're welcome.
I like how you call homosexuality an abomination.
I don't say homosexuality is an abomination, Mr. President. The Bible does.
Yes, it does. Leviticus
18:22.
Chapter and verse. I wanted to ask you a couple of questions while I had you here. I'm interested in selling my youngest daughter into slavery as sanctioned in Exodus 21:7. She's a Georgetown sophomore, speaks fluent Italian, always cleared the table when it was her turn. What would a good price for her be? While thinking about that, can I ask another? My chief of staff, Leo McGarry, insists on working on the Sabbath. Exodus 35:2 clearly says he should be put to death. Am I morally obligated to kill him myself, or is it okay to call the police? Here's one that's really important, because we've got a lot of sports fans in this town. Touching the skin of a dead pig makes one unclean, Leviticus 11:7. If they promise to wear gloves, can the Washington Redskins still play football? Can Notre Dame? Can West Point? Does the whole town really have to be together to stone my brother John for planting different crops side by side? Can I burn my mother in a small family gathering for wearing garments made from two different threads? Think about those questions, would you? One last thing. While you may be mistaking this for your monthly meeting of the ignorant tight-ass club, in this building when the president stands, nobody sits.
You're listening to The Bill Ferguson Show.
It is time to wrap up the show, and I don't have any new 5-star reviews. I don't have any reviews to read. So, I did have one listener point out that in a previous episode, and I don't even know in which one, because these kind of all blur together for me, which I'm going to take a little sidetrack here, just in case you guys didn't know. Sometimes I go weeks without having an interview, and sometimes in a week I'll have 2 or 3 different interviews with people and then stage them into shows in the coming weeks. Sometimes I'm doing the Investing Skeptically segment at the last minute, right before I mix the show. Sometimes I get 2 or 3 great ideas and I have some time, and I'll do 2 or 3 of them at one time or in one day. And so something that you hear on Wednesday of this week, just to pick a random day, I may have recorded that piece, that interview or that segment weeks ago. Some of it I recorded the day before. So sometimes people will write me emails and ask a question about something I said, like, did you mean this at the end of the last show? And I'm like, I don't know what you mean. What did I mean? Because I don't know what I said at the end of the last show, because I've got a lot of things going on. So if you want to comment on something, if you want me to comment on something specifically, let me know the show number it was in, and let me know what was said, or at least give me a time spot, because I don't have the time to go back and spend an hour to try to figure out what you're talking about. This topic is kind of one of those things, but it doesn't require me to go back and listen. One of the listeners had mentioned that in one of the shows, the country of Ukraine has appeared in the show, and they wanted to point out that the people that live in the country known as Ukraine don't like it being called the Ukraine. So the logic there, what I'm told, and I'm open to being corrected again, is that when you say the Ukraine, they interpret it as a section of Russia. So it becomes a subsection of of Russia, because you don't say the Russia, you just say Russia. So when you say the Ukraine, it sounds like it's part of Russia. So their request was that if I ever speak of Ukraine again, and I figured I'd share it with you guys, just call it Ukraine, not the Ukraine. It's just Ukraine, like Poland, Italy, France, Ukraine. It's an independent country, and I really think it should stay that way. And hopefully that listener hears this and is appreciative that I can make corrections as I go along. Like I said, no other reviews. So no, not a whole lot of emails. I guess everybody's been very busy, but if you have an idea for a show topic, let me know. If it's investing skeptically or an interview with somebody, let me know. If you have questions yourself or a annuity that you really want me to look at, you can contact me, phil@polarisfinancialplanning.com. And if it's your first time emailing me, do not send any personal data. Do not attach statements. Do not send your birthday or your social security number, anything like that, until we've at least communicated and you verified that you have typed in I have responded to the correct email address. And finally, quick reminders: on February 3rd, and actually a couple days before, I will be in Austin, Texas. So if you're in the area, check out the Atheist Experience or Atheist Community of Austin. And then in April, I think it's the 19th and 20th, that weekend, Easter, whenever Easter is, I will be at the American Atheist Conference in Cincinnati. Looking forward to that so very much. It'll be nice to see so many friends there again. But in the meantime, I thank you for listening. I thank you for the reviews, and I thank all the people who have already become patrons. And again, of course, that's patreon.com/Phil. And you can cost me some money by going and donating there. The funds do go to American Atheists to provide housing grants for students that come to the conference this year, the 2019 American Atheist Conference. So thank you for listening. Have a great day. I hope to see you out there on the road somewhere soon. Until then, ciao.